Have you ever been stabbed in the back by someone you trusted with your life? Not just a friend, not a colleague, but family. It's the kind of betrayal that doesn't just hurt. It brands you. It lingers under your skin like a burn you can't soothe. I'm not talking about small betrayals. I'm talking about watching someone you built your life with, someone you grew up with, turn around and take everything you worked for. That's what my brother did to me. We started from nothing. Dirt under our fingernails, sweat on our backs. We built a company that stood as a symbol of everything our family believed in: hard work, loyalty, and pride. It wasn't flashy, but it was ours. And in the end, it was all a lie. He didn't just steal money. He didn't just steal the company. He tried to steal my name, my legacy. And for a while, it felt like he won. I lost my job, my home, my reputation. Friends turned their backs. Clients stopped calling. I was invisible, a ghost haunting the house we built together. But here's the thing about being pushed to the ground. You learn real quick whether you're the kind of man who stays down or the kind who gets back up. I didn't just get up. I learned. I waited. And when the time was right, I struck back. Quiet, precise, brutal. Not with fists, not with shouting, with patience, with the kind of justice that leaves no bruises, just scars on the soul. And when it was over, he wasn't just broke, he was broken. I didn't take revenge, I took everything. If you think that sounds harsh, maybe you've never been truly betrayed. But trust me, some betrayals demand a price. And my brother, he paid in full. Stick around, because you're about to hear how the man who thought he was untouchable learned the hard way that when you cross blood, you bleed. Before we dive in, if stories of betrayal and justice hit close to home for you, do me a favor. Hit the like button, drop a comment telling me your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Now let's begin. My name's Adam Reynolds. I'm not the kind of man who chases spotlight or titles. I don't wear fancy suits, and I sure as hell don't spend my days in boardrooms talking in circles. I build things, with my hands, with my mind. That's how I was raised. Growing up in a small town in Missouri, hard work wasn't just expected. It was a way of life. My father, God rest his soul, ran a modest construction business. It wasn't much to look at on the outside: a battered old warehouse, a dirt lot filled with beat-up trucks and rusted tools. But inside, it was something sacred. That warehouse was the heart of our family, a place where integrity mattered more than money, where promises were made with handshakes and broken knuckles were badges of honor. My brother Nick and we grew up swinging hammers before we could even ride bikes. Saturdays were spent hauling lumber, mixing cement, learning how to do things the right way. No shortcuts, no excuses. And my old man, he didn't believe in favoritism. Nick and I earned every dollar we made there. No handouts, no special treatment. We were different, even back then. I was the quiet one, methodical, patient. Nick was a storm in work boots. Loud, charming, could talk his way out of anything, or so he thought. But we were brothers. We had each other's backs. At least, that's what I believed. When our father passed away, the company, Reynolds and Sons, became ours. 50-50 split. It wasn't even a question. He built it. We were supposed to honor it. Together. For years we did. We weathered bad economies, fought through tough winters, kept the company alive when bigger firms collapsed around us. While others cut corners, we doubled down on quality. While others chased easy money, we stuck with what we knew best: honesty and hard work. Clients respected us. Employees trusted us. The Reynolds name stood for something, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that respect doesn't pay the bills. And for some men, loyalty isn't a virtue. It's a weakness they can exploit. I didn't know it yet, but my brother, the kid I shared a bedroom with, the man I stood beside at our father's funeral, he was about to teach me a lesson no school or job could ever prepare you for. A lesson about greed, about betrayal, and about how sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who aim for the deepest cuts. Reynolds and Sons wasn't just a business. It was a legacy. The kind you don't build overnight. My grandfather started it with nothing but a wheelbarrow, a set of borrowed tools, and a stubbornness that could crack granite. He survived the Great Depression pouring concrete and framing houses by hand, one nail at a time. When my dad took over, he didn't just expand the business, he built a reputation. The Reynolds name became a guarantee. If we built it, it was built to last. I still remember being a kid, riding shotgun in Dad's old F-150, the dashboard rattling and the radio stuck on some scratchy country station. We'd drive past a house or a building, and he'd point with pride. "Put that roof on in '78, he'd say. "Laid that foundation in '82, still straight as an arrow." It wasn't just about money to him. It was about doing it right, about building something that would outlive you. That's what Reynolds and Sons stood for. That's what he drilled into us. When Nick and I came of age, we didn't have much of a choice. Not that we wanted one. Summer vacations, spent digging trenches and hauling lumber. Weekends, patching drywall and sanding decks until our fingers blistered. Our friends envied us because we had a business to inherit. What they didn't understand was, it wasn't being given to us. It was being earned, inch by inch, year by year. Dad was tough, but fair. You showed up on time, you put in the work, you respected the craft. Didn't matter if you were his son or a stranger. Screw up a measurement or leave a job half finished, and he'd have you tearing it down and starting over. It wasn't personal. It was principle. We hated it sometimes. But deep down, we were proud. When Dad passed, a heart attack at 62, it was like a hammer blow to the chest, the kind of pain that doesn't just leave you mourning, it leaves you adrift. But we had the business. We had each other. Or at least, that's what I thought. Nick and I made a promise standing over Dad's grave, the rain pouring down so hard it felt like the sky itself was grieving with us. We promised to keep Reynolds and Sons alive, to honor what he built, to stick together, blood and brick, hand in hand. I kept that promise. Nick had other plans. Growing up, Nick was my shadow, or maybe I was his. We were only 2 years apart, close enough in age that we fought over everything. Toys, the last slice of pizza, even who got to ride shotgun. But no matter how much we bickered, at the end of the day we had each other's backs. In school, Nick was the golden boy, captain of the football team voted most likely to succeed. He had that kind of easy charisma that made people want to follow him. Me? I was quieter, more content working with my hands than charming a crowd. But we balanced each other out. He was the face. I was the backbone. Dad used to joke that we were like the 2 legs of a ladder. You needed both if you wanted to climb. And for a long time, that's exactly how it was. When we took over the company, we fell into a rhythm. Nick handled the clients, the deals, the speeches. I handled the blueprints, the site inspections, the crew. He'd wine and dine the big accounts. I made sure the houses didn't fall down once we built them. Different roles, same mission. It wasn't perfect. What family business is? We argued. God, we argued. About hiring, about money, about whether to expand into commercial projects. But at the end of the day, we'd shake hands, crack a beer, and move on. That's what brothers do. Or so I thought. Looking back now, the cracks were there. Small things at first. Nick started showing up late to meetings, leaving early, missing deadlines. He spent more time on his phone than on job sites. Talked about scaling and profit margins in ways that made my stomach twist. I figured it was stress. The pressure of keeping the business afloat in tough times. I told myself he'd snap out of it, that we just needed to ride the storm. Because that's what family does, right? They weather storms together. They don't jump ship the minute the waves get rough. But Nick wasn't weathering the storm. He was building a lifeboat, and he had every intention of sailing off alone, leaving me to drown. At first I brushed it off. Late meetings, missed calls. Excuses that didn't quite fit, but didn't seem worth a fight. Nick was busy and we were busy. Stress makes men act strange sometimes, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. But the cracks got harder to ignore. Small vendors we worked with for years suddenly stopped returning calls. Clients, were the kind we could always count on, started pulling out of deals without a word. Suppliers complained about unpaid invoices. And Nick just smiled, waved it all off, said it was the economy, said not to worry, but I worried. I stayed late going over books, invoices, job site reports. Numbers didn't lie, even when people did. And the numbers told me something was wrong. Expenses ballooning for no clear reason. Cash disappearing faster than we could track. Jobs underbidding just to keep the lights on, or so I thought. One night, well past midnight, I found myself alone in the office flipping through bank statements. That's when I noticed it. Payments to companies I'd never heard of. Shell companies, small LLCs with generic names. Prime Logistics, Evergreen Supply, names that don't tell you a thing. And every one of them linked to a private account under Nick's name. I felt sick. This wasn't cutting corners. This wasn't trying to save the business. This was theft. Slow, calculated, deliberate. The next morning I confronted him. No yelling, no accusations, just questions. "Nick, what's going on with these accounts?" He barely flinched. "Don't worry about it, Adam. You handle the jobs. Let me handle the money." Dismissive, cold. Not the brother I grew up with. Not even close. Still, I tried to believe it was a misunderstanding, because believing anything else would mean admitting something far worse, that the man I trusted most might be the one tearing us apart from the inside. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was already here, and I was about to find out just how deep betrayal can cut, not from enemies, but from family. When you lose someone like my father, the world doesn't stop. It doesn't even slow down. The sun rises, traffic jams, bills pile up, but inside you, everything stands still, like someone hit pause on your soul. Dad's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a fracture, the kind you don't see right away. The kind that runs deep under the surface, slowly splintering until everything you thought was solid turns to dust. We buried him on a grey November morning. No fancy suits, no polished speeches, just worn boots, calloused hands, and the kind of grief that words can't touch. Nick stood beside me at the gravesite, silent, unreadable. I remember thinking he looked different, not just sad, hollow. Afterward, we sat in the old truck, the one Dad loved, still smelling faintly of motor oil and pine air freshener. We didn't say much, didn't need to. It was understood. We had to carry on. For him, for the name he spent his life building. A few weeks later, the will was read. Dad split everything equally, 50-50. The house, the savings, the company, everything. No surprise there. He trusted us to stick together, to be the legs of that ladder he always talked about. For a while it looked like we might. Nick threw himself into work, at least on the surface. He showed up to meetings, gave rousing speeches to the crew about the future and honoring Dad's legacy. Clients loved it. Investors nodded along. Even I wanted to believe it. But behind the scenes, the cracks widened. Late-night phone calls Nick wouldn't explain. Trips out of town for business that left more questions than answers. Accounts shuffled, funds reallocated, deals made without my knowledge. And me? I kept grinding, pouring concrete, managing sites, keeping the machine running, blindly trusting that the bond we had, the bond forged in blood, sweat, and childhood scraps, would hold. What I didn't realize back then is simple. Grief changes people, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Nick didn't just change, he transformed. Grief didn't break him, it twisted him, turned him into something I didn't recognize. A man who looked like my brother, talked like my brother, but wasn't. And by the time I saw the truth, it was too late. It started small, subtle, a missing signature here, a misplaced document there. Paperwork shuffled in ways that didn't make sense, but were just messy enough to seem like oversight, not sabotage. Nick began bringing in his own people, accountants I'd never met, lawyers who spoke in circles and wore smiles so sharp they could cut glass. He said it was about modernizing, streamlining, taking us to the next level. Big words, empty promises. I still remember the first real sign that something was wrong. A Friday afternoon, the office half empty, the smell of stale coffee lingering. I was going through invoices when I found it, a transfer authorization slip. My signature was on it, only I hadn't signed it. I stared at that piece of paper for a long time, my gut twisting tighter with every second. Forgery, plain as day. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a clerical error, anything but what it really was. Proof that my brother wasn't just cutting corners, he was cutting me out. When I confronted him, he laughed, actually laughed. "Don't worry about it, Adam," he said, brushing me off like I was a pesky fly. "You're good at what you do. Stick to the job sites. Let me handle the paperwork." I should have fought harder right then, should have stormed into a lawyer's office. But family loyalty is a funny thing. It makes you second-guess what's right in front of your face. It makes you hope when you should run. So I stayed, kept working, kept believing that the bond we had, the childhood scraped knees, the shared heartbreak of losing Dad, meant something. But loyalty is a currency. And Nick, he was bankrupt. The real blow came a month later. I walked into the office, same as always, but my access card didn't work. Tried it again. Red light, no beep, no click, no entry. I knocked, no answer. Finally, someone from HR opened the door, her face tight with nerves. "I'm sorry, Adam, you're no longer employed here." Fired. From the company my father built. The company I helped carry on my back for years. No warning, no discussion. Just gone. Nick didn't even have the guts to tell me himself. And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't about business, it wasn't even about money, it was personal. Nick wasn't just taking the company, he was taking everything. Or so he thought. I stood there for a moment, card in hand, heart pounding in my ears. It's a strange thing, realizing you've been erased from your own life. 1 second, you're a partner. The next, you're just gone. No call, no meeting, no explanation, just silence. I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I drove. Nowhere in particular, and just away. When I finally stopped, it was in front of a bar we used to go to back when times were simpler. Back when Nick and I would sit shoulder to shoulder, arguing over football and laughing about how one day the company would be ours. How naive we were. Inside, I found a corner booth and ordered a whiskey, then another, and another. Somewhere between the second and third drink, the anger started to push through the numbness. The questions piled up. How? Why? How long had he been planning this? I pulled out my phone and started digging. Public records, company filings, emails, connections I hadn't bothered to question before, and that's when the pieces started falling into place. Nick hadn't just fired me. He had systematically dismantled any claim I had to the company. 6 months earlier, he filed amendments to the company's ownership structure, reassigning shares, changing account signatories. He forged my name on enough documents to make it all look legal on the surface. He funneled money into side businesses, shell companies designed to siphon off profits. He even moved the company's official headquarters on paper to a property he bought under his wife's name. It was a full-scale takeover, and it wasn't sloppy, it was meticulous, planned, executed with precision. But there was one thing Nick didn't know, one thing he hadn't accounted for. My father didn't just teach me how to build houses, he taught me how to build systems. And in the systems I designed, there were fail-safes, backups, redundancies, hidden away, buried deep, because you don't spend your life building something without learning how to protect it. I had proof, buried in places Nick never thought to look. Receipts, contracts, emails, paper trails he thought he erased, but hadn't. I wasn't out. Not yet. Nick thought he'd buried me, but all he'd really done was plant a seed. And seeds, given the right conditions, they grow. I wasn't naive enough to think a confrontation would fix anything. Nick had made his choices. He'd crossed lines you can't uncross. But I needed to look him in the eye one last time. Needed to see if there was even a shred of the brother I once knew left behind the man he'd become. The next morning, I showed up at the office. No key card, no invitation. Didn't matter. I waited by his truck, the new one, shiny, loaded. The kind Dad would have sneered at for being more luxury than workhorse. Nick pulled up late, sunglasses on, a Bluetooth headset clipped to his ear like he was some Fortune 500 executive. When he saw me, he smirked, like he'd been expecting this moment, like he was enjoying it. "We don't have anything to talk about, Adam," he said, brushing past me like I was just another problem he could avoid. But I wasn't moving. "What you did? You stole everything," I said, my voice low, steady. "You didn't just betray me, you betrayed Dad. Everything he built, everything he stood for." Nick pulled off his sunglasses and finally looked at me. Cold, empty, no regret, no hesitation. "Dad's gone, Adam. This is business now. Grow up." Grow up. That was rich, coming from the man who was stealing from his own blood. "You could have had it all, Nick. We both could have," I said. "But you wanted more, and you'll choke on it." He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "You were always the worker bee, always so loyal, so proud. Look where it got you." He shook his head. pity dripping from every word. You don't belong in this world anymore, Adam. And frankly, you never did. For a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of something. Fear. Guilt. Maybe just the ghost of the kid I used to know. But it was gone before I could be sure. Nick turned his back on me and walked away, keys jingling in his hand, whistling like he didn't have a care in the world. That's when I knew. There was no going back. No fixing this. Nick had declared war. He just didn't know it yet. I left without another word. No yelling, no threats, just quiet resolve. Because some battles aren't fought with fists or fury. They're fought with patience, with precision. And I had both. He thought he won. He had no idea what was coming. You think you're prepared for something like that? You tell yourself you're tough, that you can take a hit and get back up. But when it actually happens, when your whole life gets yanked out from under you, it doesn't feel like a punch. It feels like drowning. Word spread fast. The kind of fast only small towns know. One day, I was Adam Reynolds, co-owner, builder, trusted name. The next, I was just Adam, the guy who got himself kicked out of his own company. The worst part wasn't the whispers. It wasn't the friends who suddenly stopped answering calls. It wasn't even the pitying looks from old clients, the ones who shook my hand 100 times, now pretending not to see me at the grocery store. No, the worst part was the silence, the empty house, the phone that didn't ring, the calendar that stayed blank. I lost everything, the business, the paycheck, the purpose. Days bled into nights, and nights into something even darker. I stopped shaving, stopped fixing the leaky faucet in the kitchen, stopped pretending I was okay. There's a kind of loneliness that settles in your bones, not just because you're alone, but because you realize the one person you trusted most was the one who left you there. I thought about Dad a lot in those days, about the way he used to stand with his arms crossed, staring at a half-built house, visualizing what it would become. Measure twice, cut once, he always said. Build it right the first time, and it'll stand longer than you will. I guess I thought Nick and I were like one of those houses, built right, built to last. Turns out we had termites in the foundation the whole time, and I never saw it. For a while I stayed down, longer than I care to admit. But grief and anger are funny things. If you sit with them long enough, they start to change shape. What starts as sadness turns to bitterness. And bitterness, if you're smart, if you're patient, it becomes fuel. Nick thought he destroyed me. He thought I'd disappear, fade away. But he didn't understand one thing. You can tear a man down, strip him of his money, his business, his pride. But if you leave his name intact, if you leave his will intact, he's still dangerous. And me? I was just getting started. The first thing you learn in construction is simple. Don't rush the foundation. If it's not solid, it doesn't matter how pretty the walls are. It'll all come crashing down. Turns out revenge works the same way. I wasn't interested in quick payback. No screaming matches. No social media rants. I wanted something that would last. Something that would hurt. Nick took everything I built. So I decided I'd build something new, something better. And I'd do it the same way I always had. Slow, steady, precise. First, I needed allies. Real ones. Not the fake friends who disappeared the minute my title vanished. The people who knew the real story. Who had seen the cracks before they widened. I started making quiet calls. Old crew chiefs. Suppliers we'd worked with for decades. Clients who still trusted the Reynolds name, even if they didn't trust the man using it now. At first, the conversations were awkward. Nobody wanted to pick a side, not openly. But betrayal leaves a sour taste, even when you're just watching it from the sidelines. And it turns out a lot of people didn't like what Nick had become. They hadn't said anything because they thought he was untouchable. I was about to show them he wasn't. Next came the paperwork. The boring stuff no one pays attention to, but should. Contracts, receipts, emails, bank transfers. Every scrap of evidence Nick thought he'd buried. I knew where to look. More importantly, I knew what it all meant. It wasn't just theft, it wasn't just fraud, it was a pattern, a system. Shell companies hiding profits, fake invoices billing for work that was never done, money funneled into personal accounts, off-the-books deals with shady subcontractors. And the best part? Most of it was in my name. Forged, of course. Nick had gotten greedy, sloppy. He didn't just cut me out. He left fingerprints all over the crime scene. I wasn't ready to strike yet. Not even close. You don't demolish a house by knocking on the door and asking politely. You find the weak spots, the load-bearing beams, and you wait. Wait for the perfect moment to pull them all at once and watch the whole thing collapse. Nick thought he won. Nick thought I was gone. But what he didn't know, what he would never see coming, was that I wasn't building a comeback. I was building his downfall. It's funny, when you hit rock bottom you learn real fast who's there to throw dirt on you, and who's there to pull you out. Turns out, Nick had made a lot more enemies than I realized. Not everyone wears betrayal on their sleeve. Some people let it simmer, slow, quiet, waiting for the right moment. I started reaching out, carefully. Coffee shop meetings, phone calls that began with awkward silences and ended with handshakes. Old crew members who got pushed out when Nick decided experience didn't look good on a balance sheet. Suppliers who got stiffed on invoices and left in the lurch. Even a few loyal clients, the kind Dad always said, would stick around when the dust settled. I wasn't looking for an army. I didn't need noise, I needed precision. People who knew how Nick operated, who had seen the cracks behind the polished front he presented to the world. There was Rick, one of our oldest foremen, the kind of guy who could build a house blindfolded and still finish under budget. Nick had forced him out last year after 30 years of service because he was too old school. Rick didn't say much when I called, just, "Tell me where you need me." Then there was Maggie from Accounts Payable, smart, sharp, and fiercely loyal to Dad's way of doing business. Nick had demoted her when she questioned a few too many creative expenses. When she heard my voice on the phone, she didn't hesitate. "It's about damn time," she said. Piece by piece, I gathered what I needed. Not just people, but information. Maggie still had copies of old ledgers Nick thought were destroyed. Rick had kept blueprints and job site reports that showed the shortcuts Nick had been taking to boost profits. Unsafe wiring, faulty foundations. Corners cut so deep you'd think they were trying to save their way to the grave. Each document, each conversation was a nail in Nick's coffin. But I wasn't ready to hammer it shut. Not yet. Patience, Dad would have said. Measure twice, cut once. Build it right, and it'll last longer than you will. So I measured, and I planned, and I waited. Because the thing about revenge, real revenge, is that it has to be earned. It has to sting. Not just for a moment, but forever. Nick thought he had burned every bridge. What he didn't realize was that the ashes still remembered the fire. And now, the fire was coming back, brighter, hotter, and aimed right at him. Revenge isn't just about tearing someone down. It's about building something better, something so solid they can't even comprehend how you did it right under their nose. I didn't rush, didn't post about it, didn't announce my comeback with some grand statement. No, I did what I knew best. I worked, quietly, methodically, brick by brick. With Rick's help, I started putting together a new crew. Old names, trusted hands, people who valued a solid foundation over a quick buck, people Nick had underestimated and discarded. We found an old warehouse on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, a tin roof that rattled in the wind, cement floors cracked from years of neglect, but it was ours. It reminded me of Dad's first shop, back before the company had logos on trucks and polished business cards. Back when the only thing you sold was your word, and that word meant something. I didn't advertise. No grand opening, no social media blitz, just word of mouth. A call here, a text there. Adam's building again. The real Reynolds is back. At first, it was small jobs, kitchens, decks, roof repairs, cash jobs, quiet jobs. But as the months rolled by, something started to happen. The same clients who had abandoned me when Nick pushed me out, they started coming back. Not all at once, but enough to matter. They weren't looking for discounts or flash, they were looking for trust. And trust is something Nick had spent years burning through like dry wood in a bonfire. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy too, digging, pulling old records, piecing together a paper trail so thick it could bury a man alive. Safety violations, fake inspections, fraudulent permits. Enough dirt to plant Nick 6 feet under without ever touching a shovel, but we didn't leak it. Not yet. Timing was everything. Nick was too busy flaunting his success to notice the ground shifting beneath his feet. New contracts, new trucks, new house, bigger, flashier, more debt piled on top of more debt. He thought he was invincible. He thought I was forgotten. He was wrong, because while he was busy building a castle out of sand, I was pouring concrete. Slow, solid, permanent. And when the tide finally came in, I wasn't just going to knock over his castle, I was going to drown it. Building quietly was satisfying. Watching the jobs roll in, feeling the trust return, it was fuel. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I didn't just want to rebuild my life. I wanted to make sure Nick couldn't tear down anyone else's ever again. And for that, I needed evidence. Real, undeniable, bulletproof. Maggie and I set up shop in the back of the warehouse. A folding table, 2 old laptops, and boxes of files we'd saved from the wreckage Nick thought he burned. We cross-referenced everything. Purchase orders that didn't match deliveries, invoices billed for work never completed, inspections that were signed off by inspectors who didn't exist. It was a trail of lies, polished to look like business as usual. But underneath it stank of fraud. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Nick hadn't just cut corners, he'd obliterated them. Unlicensed labor, fake safety certifications, cheap materials passed off as premium grade. Projects barely held together, sold at luxury prices. And the money, he funneled it into shell companies, real estate flips under his wife's name, offshore accounts he thought no one would find. But he wasn't careful. Not really. See, Nick thought he was smarter than the system, smarter than the clients, the banks, the inspectors, smarter than me. What he forgot is that I built that system with him. I knew where the cracks would be, where to push, where to dig. We compiled everything. Thousands of pages of documentation, email threads, signed contracts, financial transfers. Each piece by itself. Maybe not enough to do real damage. But together, it was a noose. And Nick had already put his head through it. We even found testimonies. Former employees who'd been fired or pushed out. Vendors he'd stiffed. Homeowners whose dream houses turned into nightmares of black mold and sagging foundations. Some of them didn't want to talk at first. Who could blame them? Nick still had money, power, connections, but anger has a way of loosening lips. And once they started talking, they didn't stop. By the end, we had enough to bury him, not just in lawsuits, but in criminal charges. Still, I didn't rush. Timing was everything. A careless strike would warn him. Give him time to hide, to cover his tracks. No, I wanted Nick exposed, not just in court, not just in whispers, publicly, permanently, irreversibly. And the moment was coming. I could feel it. Because you don't just wait for revenge, you build it. And when you build it right, you make sure it can't be torn down. They say patience is a virtue. I say patience is a weapon, sharpened by time, deadly when wielded right. I watched Nick from the shadows, watched him climb higher, smug and untouchable. New contracts announced with fanfare, articles in local business magazines calling him a visionary, awards he didn't deserve, parading across his office shelves. He basked in it, the fame, the money, the illusion of invincibility. But I wasn't looking for the right headline. I was looking for the right moment, the moment when he was at his peak, too arrogant to see the fall coming. And then it came, like clockwork. Nick announced his biggest project yet, a luxury condominium complex right downtown, a $50 million project, the crown jewel in his empire. Investors lined up, banks handed over loans with fat interest rates. Pre-sales opened to the public, flashy marketing videos, glowing write-ups in the press, everyone clapping, cheering, drinking his Kool-Aid, everyone but me, because I knew what was behind the glitter, shoddy materials, ghost contractors, safety reports faked 6 ways to Sunday, money laundering baked right into the budget. All I had to do was nudge the house of cards, one good push, and watch it crumble. I reached out to the right people, quietly, carefully, state regulators, building inspectors, journalists with an eye for scandal and a taste for blood. I didn't leak everything, and not yet, just enough to get them curious. To make them start asking questions Nick couldn't answer without lying, and lying badly. They started poking around, requesting documents, asking for permits, double-checking contractors, and like termites in the walls, doubt started spreading. Nick was too busy cutting ribbons and flashing smiles to notice the ground shifting beneath his feet. He thought he was bulletproof. He thought no one could touch him. He was wrong. I wasn't coming at him with noise and fury. I wasn't knocking down the door. I was waiting, letting the cracks spread, letting the pressure build, until one day it would all collapse under its own rotten weight. Nick had spent years building a kingdom on lies. What he didn't realize was that the lies were a fuse, and I was about to light it. It started with a single headline, a whisper in the news. Major developer under investigation for fraud and safety violations. Nick shrugged it off at first, laughed it away in interviews, called it a witch hunt, jealous competitors, angry ex-employees, the usual excuses. But the thing about investigations is, once they start, they don't stop. They dig, and the deeper they went, the uglier it got. Regulators found permits that didn't exist. Inspectors uncovered structural flaws so dangerous that half-finished buildings were ordered to be demolished on the spot. Investors panicked, banks pulled funding, buyers cancelled their contracts. The $50 million project? Dead in the water. And Nick, for all his bravado, for all his charm, he couldn't bluff his way out of this one. Reporters camped outside his office, lawyers circled like vultures, subpoenas rained down like hailstones in a storm, and then the bombshell, wire fraud, money laundering, forgery, the forged signatures and the ones he thought would disappear. They came back to haunt him. Witnesses lined up, former employees, contractors, suppliers, all with stories, all with receipts, all ready to bury him. Nick was arrested in front of the cameras, handcuffed, head down, shoved into the back of a squad car while the world watched. His wife filed for divorce 2 weeks later. His assets, the big house, the fancy cars, the offshore accounts, frozen, seized, dismantled piece by piece. I didn't celebrate, didn't pop champagne or gloat. I just watched, quiet, steady, because this wasn't just revenge. It was justice, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't brag, the kind that walks in, dismantles your life, and leaves without a trace. Nick had spent years clawing his way to the top, stepping on everyone who trusted him, betraying the family name, burning bridges he thought he'd never need to cross again. In the end, he didn't just lose the company. He lost his reputation, his freedom, everything. And the best part, he did it to himself. All I did was give him a little push, measure twice, cut once, build it right the first time, and it'll stand longer than you will. Dad was right. When it was over, there was no parade. No awards, no pats on the back. Just silence, the kind that wraps around you like a heavy coat, thick and unmoving. But it wasn't the silence of loss. It was peace, the kind that only comes when you know, deep down, that the scales have been balanced, that what was broken had finally been set right. I went back to work the next day, no time off, no celebration, just another house to frame, another roof to patch, because that's what my father would have done. That's what I was raised to do. The warehouse we turned into a new headquarters still smelled of sawdust and motor oil. The radio still played the same old country songs. Clients still came by with blueprints tucked under their arms, still trusted the Reynolds name, my Reynolds name, the real one. I never once said Nick's name again, not to the clients, not to the crew, not even to myself. He was a chapter that closed itself, a lesson written in betrayal and signed in blood. People sometimes ask me if I regret it, if I regret going so far, hitting so hard. And I tell them the truth, no, not for a second, because some wounds don't heal with time, some betrayals don't fade with forgiveness, some scars aren't meant to disappear. They're meant to remind you that trust is precious, that loyalty is rare, that when someone tries to bury you, they better remember that you're a seed. Nick thought he was burying me, but he was planting something he couldn't control, couldn't kill. In the end, he wasn't defeated by me. He was defeated by his own greed, his own arrogance. I just made sure he couldn't escape it. And me, I kept building, one brick at a time, solid, simple, real, because that's how you make something that lasts. That's how you make something worth fighting for. And if there's one thing I know for sure, revenge fades. But rebuilding? That lasts forever. If you enjoyed this story, do me a favor. Hit the like button, Leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone else. It's making sure they have to watch you succeed without them. Thanks for sticking around. See you in the next story.